some of you that came in a little bit later, I'm James Hendricks. I'm the conservation agronomist in the Northeast region and have worked with the Master Farmer program for 12 years. I'm going to go over the watersheds and what is a watershed. And generally, when I go and teach this in classes, whether it be high school or elementary, generally what students say, well, that's a place where you get out from under the water or rain, or somebody will say, well, it's a shed over a pump, but that's not so. But what we're going to do is we have 12 major watersheds in the state of Louisiana. And, if we were to cover all of them today, then it would probably take all day for us to do it. So we're going to pick a watershed, and the one that I'm in right now. The content of it is going to be the same in any watershed, but in the future, if this training goes to online training, then what we're going to do is go ahead and do all the watersheds so you can actually pick and choose. If any of you want a particular PowerPoint presentation on your watershed, either notify Donna or myself and we'll make arrangements to get it to you. So anyway, today, of course, you've already seen this. This is the collaborative partners that we have in the with the Master Farmer program. And this is the watershed that we're going to be talking about today. It's the largest watershed in the state of Louisiana. It's where I'm located. Actually, the Northeast Research Station is located in the Delta on the Mississippi River, or right next to the Mississippi River in Tensas Parish. We have around 12 parishes that we are working directly in as far as drainage area. What is a watershed? Everybody in the world lives in a watershed. It can be a large watershed or it can be a small watershed. But what is a watershed? Basically, it's all the area on a map that drains to a particular point. And so you even have a watershed where you live. I mean, even where your house is located. So if your house is located on a hill and it drains into a ditch, then basically your lot where your house is the watershed for that drainage ditch. We're going to talk about larger watersheds today, and basically what we're going to look at is the importance of watersheds, why they're important when we study them, how we go about studying them. And I guess you should know that, Donna, the people that work with the Master Farmer program work directly with research scientists. We work with NRCS, the Soil and Water Conservation Districts, on projects year-round where we're actually looking at water quality, air quality, dealing with all the soil, water, air, plants, and animals. Research is going on so that you can get up-to-date information. We all live in a watershed, just like I said. They have to be healthy for our environment and our economy. They provide all of our water for drinking, irrigation, industry, recreation, and wildlife. So I think everybody will agree that, the importance of water, keeping it clean, is very important to life. If you talk about the size of watersheds, and I told you we're going to be talking about a little bit larger watersheds. Basically, when we're doing research, we look at a sub-watershed, and it's a 12-digit. If you look at hydrologic unit codes, it's based on the number of digits that are in that code. As you can see, if it's a 12-digit sub-watershed, that's 10 to 40,000 acres. And when we're doing studies, if we want to make changes in a water body, generally we will back up to a 10-digit or 12-digit watershed, because the practices that we put in, we can measure them and see if they're being effective in improving the water quality in that watershed. Then you can move to a larger watershed, but at least you would know that the work that you're doing is positive. On the other hand, if we were going to go out and put a project in, a small project on a 100-acre field, and we wanted to study the effects on the Mississippi River, you can see that probably we wouldn't be able to tell any difference. So you have to work small, and as you see improvements, or if you see success in these projects, then you can apply them to other areas and even to larger watersheds. When you look at a region like the lower Mississippi, you're talking about 177,000 square miles that drain into that watershed, and that's basically the region where we're located. But so you can pretty much see a lot of the rivers that we have in your watersheds, we call them 8 digits. There's our cataloging units. That's the 450,000 acres generally in that, or 700 square miles. So a lot of and you'll actually see them in this presentation. I think you'll recognize some of them. Here's lower Mississippi is a 2-digit. You see the identification number 08. Anything that's in the lower Mississippi is going to have the numbers in the front is going to be identified with the lower Mississippi. So you can see By Mason, Beth River, Mummertall, all of those are part of the lower Mississippi watershed. So that gives you some idea of what the watershed, how you identify a watershed. You can go online, and if you wanted to see the water quality, the studies that have been done, or the data is collected by DEQ on sub-watersheds, you can go online to their site, look at any of these 8-digit watersheds and get information that you need. The findings that we have, the best way to protect our natural resources is to understand and manage them on a watershed basis. I've already mentioned that. And anything that we do in a watershed is going to affect the entire system. So even if we're working in a small watershed, understand what we do there affects the entire system. Managing the water and our natural resources is an effective and efficient way to sustain our local economy and the environment. So everybody, I think, wants to do that. The purpose of this program is directed toward that because, you know, we want to the future generations with an environment that is sustainable, that, you know, that hopefully we leave it in better condition than we received it. Pollutants, I think Don have already mentioned this. Point source, basically you can trace that to a specific point. All of this is regulated. And so a lot of the problems with some of the watersheds or water body parameters dealing with point source like industry and stuff like that, a lot of that's being taken care of through permits. Non-point is a lot harder, of course, to identify, measure, and control because it comes from a wide variety of activities over a wide area. And that can be from construction sites, forest, land, parking lots, irrigation water, runoff from crops. So any of those are non-point. So a little bit harder to be able to identify or bring to point, but the thing is there are ways that we are able to work with non-point source to reduce the impacts on the environment. If you look at Louisiana's water inventory, we have over 66,000 miles of rivers. We have over 1 million acres that are in lakes. If you look at back up to 2010 site-specific assessments on rivers and streams, and yeah, this particular slide, you look and you say, well, this is like 9 or 10 years old. That's true, but you understand that when you're working with a body of water, if it's polluted or it has impairments, it's not something that you generally going to be able to clean up within 3 years. The work that Donna and I do when we're working with scientists and researchers and NRCS and those, when we're trying to make improvements to any parameter, whether it be dissolved oxygen, suspended sediments, turbidity, or whatever it may be in a body of water, it takes a long time. It takes very little time to pollute it or cause an impairment, but generally when you're dealing with a body of water, it takes a long time to improve it. So, you know, we work with history and we look way into the future. And so that's what we're focused on, but you can't give up. If you look at assessments were done on 66,000 miles of total miles. There's 14.3% were monitored. 2,300 of them were assessed good, but we had over 7,000 miles of them assessed impaired. Now, basically what that's meaning is they're not meeting their designated use. And there are several designated uses, whether it be for source water, drinking water, recreational use, irrigation water. There's a lot of designated uses, but each body of water for their TMDL designation has to have these designated uses. And so these were not meeting those designated uses. 1,700 of them, over 1,700 that were impaired now are meeting designated uses because of the work that's being done. So you see we have a ways to go with some of this, but we are making some improvements, but it's not something that we can give up on. When you look at 2010 assessments of lakes and ponds, over 1 million acres, 62% of those were being monitored, and we had 34,000 acres were assessed good. We had 634,000 acres of those impaired. And we have a little over 29,000 that were impaired that now are meeting designated uses. So we are making some improvements, but we still have a long way to go. Here's a major cause of impairments I'd mentioned it a few minutes ago is dissolved oxygen. Generally, EPA sets that standard at 5 parts per million unless we get some type of an alteration, because basically this was based on running water in other states. A lot of our water bodies are stagnant, and so we actually have a lot of life that can sustain in water that's below 5 parts per million, but that is the standard. Turbidity, you have total suspended solids, fecal coliforms, nitrate and nitrites, phosphorus, total dissolved solids, and sediments. When you look at the hypoxia issues in the Gulf of Mexico, and if you look at freshwater bodies and saltwater bodies, generally the limiting factors in a freshwater body are the nutrient that we have the most problem with is phosphorus. And that's what ends up causing these algal blooms and creates major problems and loss of oxygen in the water. And when you get into the saltwater bodies like the Gulf of Mexico, it's a combination of all the nutrients and all, but nitrogen is generally the biggest, is the nutrient that we're most concerned with. Dissolved oxygen is, of course, it's affected by the water temperature and the partial pressure of oxygen over the water. Basically, when you look at oxygen molecules, they slip into pockets that exist in loose nitrogen bond network in the water molecules. In other words, when you say that we have dissolved oxygen in the water, it's not dissolved in the water, but actually it's in pockets between these molecules. But it's held together by the molecules, and they weakly keep it in place. So that's how your fish and other aquatic organisms that require oxygen can actually, access the oxygen. When you look at some of the issues we run into water, or how air dissolved oxygen gets into the water and how the oxygen cycle works, you see we have like runoff nutrients from sewage or other nutrients, whether it be fertilizer or whatever. It runs off into the water, it gets in the surface layer. Generally up on the upper level where you have a lot of sunlight, you can have all this phytoplankton or these microscopic plants that start growing. And of course, at that area too, also, would you have wave action, or if you have a lot of the oxygen pressure on the water, you can get actually dissolved oxygen infused into the water at that point, at that level. And then, of course, with these plants that are going there, you get dissolved oxygen for photosynthesis. So you can, in the surface water, you can have high DO or dissolved oxygen in that surface water. If you've ever been swimming in a lake, and you notice you jump in the top level of the water and it's real warm, and you stick your feet down and it's really cold, basically that's what we call the layering effect or thermocline of the water. And there's no mixing between these 2 points. You have the denser water that's down below, and if you have a lot of oxygen in the upper level, that does not mean that it can mix with that lower level. So that's something that we have to take close account of when we're looking and studying water, because there's no mixing. The mixing does take place when we call a water turnover, and y'all seen this in lakes. When you see lakes all of a sudden change color in the fall, that's when the water temperatures of the upper and lower levels, because of the air temperatures, start to equalize, and actually this will mix, and it makes the water look really nasty, tight looking, but actually that is very important for a body of water to sustain itself. If you look at all of this phytoplankton that's growing up on the top part of these, all of these plants that are growing in the upper levels of the water, as they grow and they start covering, they will actually block sunlight. And so a lot of this will die off and it'll go down to the bottom. Well, guess what? You have microbes that living in this water that have to decompose that, and quite a few of them have to have oxygen, so they'll deplete the oxygen levels at the lower level. So that's why I was telling you that these waters will not mix. And of course, when you get into a situation where you have hypoxia or low oxygen content, you're going to have some die-off of fish and other organisms. And of course, if you get to the point where we get around 0 or close to 0 parts per million of dissolved oxygen, these organisms actually would die off. So we don't want that to happen. This is kind of a just a slide that shows basically your water temperature. As you heat water up, the amount of oxygen that's in it goes down. And because warm water cannot hold much oxygen. So it's very important that we kind of understand this. And you can look at the graph on the picture on the right-hand side, it kind of tells you when, at different levels, what starts happening in the body of water as far as what lives in it. So, we have bodies of water that have less than 5 parts per million in Louisiana, that we do have fish that are surviving in, but you understand that they have been able to adapt over hundreds and thousands of years to be able to adapt to that situation. But we do not want that to happen. We want our bodies of water to hold, enough oxygen to support whatever wildlife is there. The description of the Ouachita watershed, it starts up in the Ouachita Mountains up in west central Arkansas near Oklahoma, and it goes down through northeastern Louisiana, joins with Tensas River to form the Black River, which enters into the Red River. Watersheds is more than 10,000 square miles, and most of it is some of our rich alluvial plains. The basic crops that we grow here are cotton, corn, and soybeans, and we grow quite a bit of rice here also. The northeast corner of the basin basically is forested in pine, which is commercially harvested. This is what the watersheds look like, the 12 watersheds. This is identification, and like I say, if we went over all of them today, it would take quite a while. The one up in the right-hand corner of the state, upper right-hand corner, that is the Ouachita. And these are the parishes that are within the Ouachita drainage system. These are the streams. We have a lot of water in Louisiana. We have a lot of water bodies in each one of our watersheds, so which is important. These are the towns or cities that are involved in that area or within that area. Here are the major roads. I-20 goes through it. 165 goes through it. 167, US 65, 84, and 115. And these are some of these water bodies within it that all of you I know are probably not interested in all, unless you're in the Ouachita Basin, interested in this. But the thing is that you need to know your own watershed and what the drainage system looks like, because anything that you do in your area impacts it. And as you can see, this network of rivers and streams basically cover the entire area. And you can see that at any point in this watershed, that if you do any type of pollution, eventually it's going to end up in the water. These are subsegments. We mentioned subsegments when you're looking at doing any work within the area. Some of them are fairly large. These are ID numbers for them. It's not that important to you, but when we're looking at them from the impairment status, if we're wanting to do projects in that area, then we can look at the ID number, the subsegment number. As you can see, this at the bottom left-hand part of the screen, the name of it, and it'll tell you that if it's impaired, it needs a TMDL, or if it's fully meeting needs, or if it even already has a TMDL. So we have all of these for every water body that we have in the state of Louisiana. You look, you've already seen this in the previous slide, but you can see the bulk of the area that I'm working in is agriculture. So, we're constantly working with producers, landowners in forest industry on making sure that we do what we can to make improvements to the water quality, because eventually, it's going to end up in some other part of the state in the Gulf of Mexico. Ag use, as you can see here, you can pretty much tell in the area that I'm located, it's predominantly a large percentage of ag use. As you move a little bit further west, a little bit less, but it's in either forestry or, of course, the cities that are located over there. I want to thank you. If you've got any questions on this, I went through it kind of fast, but like I say, this is the Ouachita Basin. A lot of you listening are probably not from the Ouachita. If you want a PowerPoint presentation on yours, we have no problem sending it to you so you can get a better idea of what your watershed looks like. But we did want to stress the importance of watersheds, so really we picked the one that was the largest. Thank you.